So, good evening, folks. This is the Fireplace recording for March the 21st, 2025. And welcome to you all tonight on Fireplace. My name's Kevin McStay. Many of you will know me, but tonight we've got Claire Harrison. So, we're just going to say welcome. Hi, Claire. Hello, are you there?
Hello, everybody. Good to be here. Good to be with you tonight.
Fantastic. Thanks, Claire. And you're in Teesside, is that right, Claire?
Yeah, that's right. So I live in a place called Thornaby. I think there is at least one person in the group who's from around the corner. So I live just outside of Stockton-on-Tees in Teesside, which is the sort of area well, we're about halfway between York and Newcastle, if you don't know where Teesside is, on the east coast, northeast coast of England.
Fantastic. That's brilliant, Claire. Brilliant. And you've been involved in the prophetic for many years. Just tell me a little bit. How long have you been involved with the prophetic?
I think I first prophesied when I was about 15, something like that, but I didn't know then that that's what it was. So I probably have known about prophetic ministry and been involved in prophetic ministry for about 25, 30 years,
Wow.
really since I was a young woman. Been privileged to be in very good churches who understood and valued the prophetic, and and understood how to build on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. So
Brilliant.
yeah, so I feel like I've been involved in all kinds of different permutations of prophetic ministry.
Yeah. And I think many people on here will be familiar with you doing some of the recordings during COVID with, British Isles Council of Prophets. So there'll be people who are familiar with your face, your teaching, your voice and things. So yeah, we'll already have some familiarity with that. But what we wanted to jump into tonight, we've been doing various things over the last few months in terms of spiritual warfare, proclamations and decrees. And one of the things that seemed healthy to look into was, how we can prophesy, not just in our churches, not just over
Mhm.
individuals, but actually
Mhm.
how do we start prophesying further and beyond into our communities? How do we, become prophetic voices that begin to prophesy beyond and yeah, further into the community. Have you got thoughts about that as that sort of starting question? Where do we go?
Where do we go? Well, I guess it really starts with the question of what are we about? What is the point really of being a Christian? What are we meant to do as Christians? Not even as just as prophetic people, but I don't believe that God just puts us in a place, and that we live in an area and it doesn't carry some sense of responsibility or a sense of um, there's no coincidence that God places us where He places us.
Mm,
And as Christians, no prophet or not, we carry the authority of God. We carry a responsibility as
mm,
ministers of the gospel to impact the communities where we live. So I think that's where it's got to start, really, is that as Christians, we actually have a responsibility. We have to have an understanding that God has placed us in time and space for a reason, for His purpose.
yeah,
And I guess it's a case of getting that sorted out first in your mind.
yeah,
And that causes a shift, I think, in your perspective, a shift in the way that you approach where you live, and how engaged you are in the issues in the community, in the place itself.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. So we've got to set our times and dates, the likes of
Yeah.
Act 17, 25, 26. So it's not a surprise where he's placed us. And we're placed in time for purpose. We're placed in location for purpose.
Yeah.
And so it's then obviously establishing that purpose. And obviously it's a kingdom purpose as well. It's not just, it isn't, we are attached to a church, but how do we expand those kingdom things? If you're a prophetic person, what ways might I go out and start prophesying around my community? Is that just something I do behind closed doors, praying? Perhaps even what is the link to prayer? But do I do that just by praying over the community, or how do I start going out? Do I need other people? What shall I do?
Okay. Gosh, there's a lot. There's a lot in there.
Okay.
Um, so I mean, I think first of all, the first thing I'd like to say really is that I'm a big believer in local church. Okay, so in the
Yeah,
same way that you yourself are in a place,
yeah,
and you're
yeah,
called to that place until the Lord moves you to somewhere else.
yeah.
Um, Local churches are placed, are the gathering, the community of God, the family of God in a place as well,
Yeah.
with a specific mandate for that area. So, in terms of how we respond to that individually, I guess that of course, you can pray individually for your area, and I
Yeah.
know people who would prayer walk. You know, we moved from Newcastle to Teesside about 17 years ago, and one of the first things that we felt that the Lord wanted us to do was to prayer walk our own
Okay.
streets, our own street, the streets around. And I guess also as prophetic people, when you start
Mm,
to do that, you start to kind of hear God's voice for the neighborhood and hear God's plans for the neighborhood where
mm,
you are. So I would have done that individually. You know, when the kids were at school, I'd have
yeah,
gone out and
yeah,
prayer walked. I and in that, there's a sense of and getting to know your neighbors as well. You know, if once you start
yeah,
to
yeah.
um, you know, look at the neighborhood where you are, God just births a love for the area in your heart as well, and a
Mm,
love for those people
yeah, yeah,
that are in that
yeah,
neighborhood. So
yeah.
so that I guess on an individual level, there's got to be something that is activated in you,
Mm,
um,
mm,
because I think it's quite hard to sustain just praying abstractly for a
yes. Yeah.
place. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah,
It's a good,
I do. I
you know
do.
what I mean?
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that.
Yeah,
So I remember setting up many folks know I ran something called Pray for the City for 20 years around here. And one of the first things God commented was to pray walk around the area. And you're absolutely right. When you start to fall in love with an area, you see the places of difficulty, the places of poverty, I never knew that building was there, or that
yeah,
cult was in this city, area, town, or something. So absolutely. So I'm hearing that heart for the
yeah,
city, and even the prophets, I suppose, placed when they went into exile in Babylon, they had to fall in love. You have the likes of Daniel falls in love with Babylon, even though he's been put there into exile. So yeah, absolutely. How do we have that heart and then start to pour that out?
yeah.
So yeah, how do you sort of join with others to do that? Have you got thoughts around that? I know you had Festival Teesside last year, so that was a big thing, and we want to be able to talk about that. So take us into joining with other prophetic voices from other people in the communities. How do we do
Mm.
that?
Okay, so I, there are always people, there are always intercessors who have a
Mm,
real heart for the communities that they
mm,
live in. And in Teesside, where I live, there are certain it's thought of and spoken of in a certain way,
yeah.
because it's an area of high social deprivation. It's
Mm,
an area of need of high, pretty much all the worst social statistics
mm,
um, in the country. A lot of those are here. We
yeah.
have some of the
Yeah.
worst ones in the centre of Middlesbrough, particularly.
Mm,
And actually, what you start to find is that when you engage with that stuff, when you start to kind of care about
mm,
that stuff,
yeah.
that you get heart for it, but that you meet other people, or you start to sort of notice, even on social media, you
Yeah.
notice
Yeah.
who has the same kind of heart that you do, when you start to
Mm,
say things about your area. For a
mm,
long time during the pandemic, this is probably when I really got started
mm.
connecting with others over
Yeah,
Teesside,
yeah,
apart from my own church, outside of my own church. So
yes.
during the pandemic, I was asked by the church, when we were all in lockdown, to do a weekly broadcast, a weekly prayer
Oh,
meeting
okay.
online. Um, so I every Wednesday lunchtime, for half an hour. I went online, I shared something from God's heart, really just
Yeah.
like 10 minutes, and then led people in prayer for
Mm.
whatever, really, whatever was going on.
Yeah.
But a huge part of that was about our local area. It was about
Mm.
Teesside. That was one of the
Mm.
things that was really on my heart
Mm.
at the time. And once I started to do that, people started to connect with me.
Mm.
Um, and you can't be like this. You start to kind of make friends online, I guess, and you get to know them a little bit. And I think God was doing something specific through that
Mm.
because he knew, I didn't know, he knew
Mm.
that a few years down the line, Festival Teesside would be coming around, and
Yes.
that we would, that there was this sort of growing unity. And I think
Mm.
that's something that's very precious, really, in the Teesside area, is that church
Mm.
unity is really good across
Yeah.
all
Okay.
denominations. So
Yes.
I got
Yeah.
to know people through that.
Yeah.
Um, and people would share, I would say something. I had a burden from Hebrews 12:24, where it talks about the blood of Abel, it speaks a better word, you know.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yep.
I had this burden that the narrative, the
Mm.
word over Middlesbrough that everybody thinks, or over Teesside, is
Yes.
poverty. It's words like deprivation. It's words like teenage pregnancy,
Yes.
child poverty. We have all those horrible statistics. And I felt like part of my prophetic mandate in
Mm.
that, with this audience, this broadcasted audience, was to capture people's hearts
Mm.
with
Yeah.
that better word, you know,
Yeah.
that
Okay.
is life, and to speak
Yeah.
light and life and hope into our area. So people started to connect with me that way.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and then following that, I just went to a few local things. I got involved with a guy called Steve Sutton, who is a Baptist minister.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and Steve leads a big unity movement across, yeah, he leads something called the Gather movement. His dad leads that, the Gather movement, um, which is a church unity movement across the UK.
Right.
But
Okay.
Steve,
Yeah.
but Steve leads our sort of local, what we call Transforming Teesside Together, which is a unity movement across
Yes.
Teesside.
Yes.
So I kind of got involved with him because I had this prayer blog. Um, he came on a couple of times, because he's got this wider heart for unity.
Yes.
I started
Yes.
to
Yeah.
him. He connected me to other people, and a network just kind of grew, I guess. But it
Okay.
started with me being interested
So
about
let me
the.
jump in on some of that
Yeah.
stuff. So, so first of all, you're stepping out to do something online, and you get the sort of prayer thing. You're then connecting with some of the prayers around. You're introducing a prophetic word, Hebrews 12:24, to spur people on because
Yeah.
now you're prophesying and you're raising them up into the word for an area. And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because the Gospels never talk about a prophecy just to one church. When they say never, obviously groups of people. But if we read the New Testament, the word goes to Philippi, goes to Ephesus, goes to Galatia, and so there's a word to a region. And so you've stepped out in something, you've gathered some prayers there, you've got a prophetic word going out there, and then you're connecting with a significant leader to start landing some of this stuff. So for some people here, they go, oh, I don't have the leadership for that. So that prophetic part can be sort of stirring people to follow a direction, but there's a point where the prophetic becomes a sense of leadership as well, leading into that. And you've obviously been prophesying for many years and been involved in leadership circles. And how do you feel about the prophetic stepping up as leadership? How can you encourage people in that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not just sitting on the back row having a nice word. Actually, I've got this influence to bring because that's what the prophetic should do. Can you open that up for us, or some?
Mhm,
How did
mhm,
that happen for you? Yeah, go for it.
mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I do have the right connections, and I guess I'm a direct, quite a leaderly person myself, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
and I love I love networking. I love
Okay.
making connections
Cool.
with people. It kind of
Sure.
really floats my
Yes.
boat.
Yeah.
And I think it's important as well because I also believe in the power of numbers. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
simple that the more people that are praying, the more people that who have
Yeah.
the same heart for your region or your area,
Yeah. Yeah.
the more impactful you're likely to be, and the more you're able to do as well. So
Yes.
I guess what I would encourage is that there will be people around
Mm,
where you are.
mm,
There will be
mm,
people. There are
mm,
always intercessors,
mm,
the prophetic intercessors who are praying for an
mm,
area. The
mm.
trouble is that they tend to be not like me. They tend to not be
Mm.
connectors. They tend to be people who are quite happy in their prayer closet, doing their prayer walks, going around praying. And some of you will be like that, and don't maybe know where to reach out, where to connect with people. So
Yeah.
probably the first thing I would say really is that if God's prophesying to you about your region and
Yes.
you're in a church in that area or in a
Mm.
community, then the first person you have to tell is your pastor or your senior leader.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Cool.
That would make the most sense, I think. And um, I can't control whether they are receptive to that or whether you've got
Yeah.
that kind of atmosphere or not. But, your role as a prophet, a big part of your role is as a catalyst and a provocateur, in the right
Yeah.
sense. And to push the status quo, always to be pushing the
Mm.
edges of
Mm.
um of the status quo. And there are ways to do that that are right and that are helpful.
Yeah.
And I would say even just making a note of what you're hearing about your area and sending some thoughts, doesn't need to be a massive prophetic word, but sending some thoughts to
Yeah.
your leadership team.
Yeah.
This is what I
Yeah.
feel God's saying about this area. It might
Yeah.
even be very specific. It might be something like, I feel like God wants us to prayer walk around this park, because God showed me
Yeah.
that something has gone on there.
Yeah.
Um, and just explore, just see what happens.
Yes.
And if
Yeah.
you have a good relationship with your leaders, and you have and you're known to be someone who is not disruptive and not trouble,
Mm.
and then you'll be surprised really, because
Yeah.
you're the person that hears. God's put you as the ears in
Yeah.
that body,
Yeah.
eyes and ears.
Yeah.
So
No, that's good.
that's your contribution. It's to bring that. This is what I feel God is saying
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
wherever.
So we're talking about bringing sort of prophetic words into an area, into a region, important connection with our own leadership. So there's that area of obviously building relationships. Do we take that to other churches, other leaders that we know? Because there'll be some we know, we don't know. What right have we to say? Oh, actually, I know, Whirlwind Fellowship just down the road. Um, do we have a right? What does that, or if we do, where does that come from?
Do we have a right, and where does that come from? That's a really hard question.
Sorry.
I think relationship
Yeah,
is the foundation of
yeah,
all of
yeah,
these things.
yeah.
So I think
Mm,
the first thing you have to do is build relationship.
yeah, I think
Um,
so. Yeah.
and as I said, intercessors usually come out of the woodwork when
Mm,
when you start to draw together a prayer walk or something like that. So I
yeah,
think I think building a bit of relationship with people
yeah,
around,
yes,
in those churches,
yeah,
maybe it's a hard one, isn't it? Because I think just sending a prophetic word
yeah,
bold, into
yeah,
another church, the
yes,
likelihood is that it won't be received because there
yes,
isn't that
yeah,
relationship. We always
yeah,
talk about, you can't drive a 10-ton truck over a 10-pound bridge. You know,
yeah,
we have to be building bridges.
yeah,
So even just getting involved in some of the things that other churches are doing, maybe other churches are reaching into the community. I know in
yes,
our we've
yeah,
got a very big church, so I'm always talking in a particular context. But
yes,
we
yeah,
have things like we have a community grocery, that
mm,
that
mm,
serves the local community. Other people from other churches volunteer into that.
yes,
Um, So there may be other initiatives that churches have in the area because they have a heart, they have a love for
Mm,
might
mm,
maybe even more than your own church. And
yeah,
maybe it's something like a food bank or a community
yeah,
project or something like that.
yes,
And it might be that
yeah,
you want to connect with those people and just say,
yes,
I'm just interested to know what God is saying to you about the community or why you're
yeah,
doing what you're doing.
yeah,
Because you may
yeah,
find that they're doing something out of a
yeah,
specific calling or specific sense of God's
yeah,
heart
yeah,
for your
yeah.
area.
Yeah.
So relationship, getting to know people is so important.
Absolutely key. And relationship is actually going to imply time as well.
Yes,
And sometimes the prophetic now will do. So we just
yes.
send it off to 50 people. They'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And actually, you're absolutely right. It's not just, sending something off, but actually it is about relationship building and getting to know the right people, exploring, you've used that word, exploring, so explore relationships with your leadership, exploring the other areas of prayers around perhaps leaders in other churches you might have connections to. I'm going to leap us a bit further on. So
Sorry,
further
can
on
I
for this.
just say one
Yeah.
small
Oh
thing?
yeah. Yeah. Go for it. Go for
Um,
it.
yeah, just in the whole context of building relationships when you don't
Mm.
have them, please
Yes.
don't go in announcing yourself as a prophet. Okay? Don't go in with an agenda or what you want to
Mm.
get. We need to be able to actually build friendship that
Mm.
lasts and that isn't transactional. It isn't about a role or something that we want or we've got to be able to invest. When you're talking about
Mm.
cities and regions and communities,
Mm.
these are long-term relationships. So
Yeah.
as you're saying, it's not just about, a project or this is, I want something
Mm.
done,
Mm.
and we have to be able to listen to other people as well and
Mm.
gather a lot of information because
Mm.
you will be one piece in that.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and going in with a sense of humility is so
Yes.
important. I don't announce myself as a prophet
No.
ever.
No.
You know,
No. Yeah.
there are people who recognize me as a prophet,
Yeah.
um, but that's because I've walked with them for decades,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
have seen that in my
Yeah.
life. So
Yeah.
very important that we go in with
Yeah.
humility and a spirit to actually join with people
Yeah.
with no agenda.
Really good, really good relationship. It's a two-way thing. It's not all covenant. We're not telling people what they must do. We're submitting something for weighing. Can we? What is the spirit of persuasion? I don't mean controlling somebody, but actually, what language are we using that actually, yes, persuades this person that actually, I think this is from God. And as you say, that humility to submit it and things. So, but the
Mm.
relationships ended up with Festival Teesside. So let's
Yeah.
just talk about what landed. So there was a lot of things from what I'm hearing. There was a lot of prayer. There was vision. The vision came out of this to do something bigger than you could do apart. And obviously leaders, something like leaders working together. And you've used the word unity. What was going on? What landed? What was the
Mm.
goal? That was about Festival Teesside.
Okay, so Festival Teesside was really the brainchild of Steve that I mentioned, Steve Sutton.
Yeah. Okay.
So Steve is I would say is an apostle to our
Yeah.
area
Yeah.
actually. And so Steve has gathered leaders for years, and actually there's been a,
Mm.
a leaders' prayer meeting, church leaders' prayer meeting in Teesside in the local area for probably 20 years, something like that, at least 10,
Yeah.
between 10 and
Yeah.
20 years,
Yeah.
every Tuesday morning, and that's multi-denominational. Um,
Fantastic.
so there are these foundational things that are in place
Mm.
already.
Mm.
Steve Sutton then comes along as a really apostolic guy with
Mm.
with the ability
Mm.
and the vision to be able to do something on that bigger scale.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing is that God had already done the foundational work.
Mm. Mm.
So, those years of prayer, years of building relationship between
Yeah.
church leaders
Yeah.
across denominations,
Yes.
with
Yes.
no
Yeah.
agenda,
Yes.
ended up in a fertile soil for
Fantastic.
Steve to be able to come along and say, hey
Mm.
guys, let's
Mm.
do
Mm.
something amazing,
Mm.
let's bring the gospel to the whole of Teesside, So Festival
Wow.
Teesside was his brainchild, and and a unity
Mm.
initiative from church leaders that were already united.
Mm.
Steve
Mm.
Steve's Steve sees his mandate is to draw as many people, as many church leaders into that
Yes,
unity
yes,
as possible.
yes, yes,
And then he partnered with the church leaders partnered with the Luis Palau Association,
yes. All right. Yes,
who
yeah.
yeah, so the Luis Palau Association are they put on festivals, evangelistic festivals all over the world in
Yes, yeah.
partnership with local churches. Um, so they were the ones that kind of provided the ops, they have access to all these bands and equipment, and we between the churches all committed financially
Yes,
and raised funds from congregations
yes,
and
yeah.
ordinary Christians. They provided all the volunteers
Yes,
and
yeah.
the prayer and everything. So we owned it, but the Luis Palau Association made it happen.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
yeah. So it's
so
networking
first,
together for a region, and how many churches actually sort of got involved with it?
there were about 70 churches
Fantastic.
across the
Yeah,
area,
yeah,
and that's a testament to the unity that's been
yeah.
built. So
Wow, wow.
70, I think it's 71, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And that is, yeah, that was across all sorts of denominations, from very charismatic to not so
Yeah,
charismatic as well. Am I
yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So
absolutely.
just the
Yeah.
basis
And
of the
and from big
gospel.
churches, but big
Yeah,
churches like ours, we
yeah,
are the biggest church in
yeah,
Teesside,
yeah,
to churches that had a few old
yeah,
ladies.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so it was about heart unity, and
yeah,
so
yeah.
and
Amazing.
so it was amazing, and it enabled smaller churches, very small
That's
churches, to be
right.
able to do
Yeah,
something that they could never do because they
yeah,
don't have the
yeah,
resources.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. And
so
that's the synergy of vision. It isn't just additive, it multiplies. Just that beauty there of the size of the church. Hebrews 12, the end of Hebrews 12, we're all complete with every other member of the body of Christ. There's something about
yeah,
completion, even when the small group gets involved. There's something about the completion of Christ that is in us and through us. So it's beautiful when different sizes, shapes, I guess as individuals come together across an area. Unity is such a powerful platform for the gospel. Mm.
yeah.
So tell us about the prayer that was going behind that, or how did prophetic words integrate with that? You've got praying going on. We've got this
Mhm.
event going on. It's come out of your relationship, significant leadership relationship over years. It's integrating with the praying. So how did prophetic words come into that, or do we just pray for what's going on? But how's that happen?
Well, I pulled together a prayer team. I was asked
Okay.
by Steve to lead on prayer for
Yeah.
Festival Teesside. So because of various networks and his
Mm,
networks, I found out who the sort of significant prayers were
mm,
in various churches, and I drew together a team, a multi-denominational team that had a
mm.
couple of vicars in it. It
Yeah.
had charismatics. It had
Yeah.
non-charismatics, in all different flavors really in between.
Yeah.
So there was about how many was in the team? It was about 12 in
Mm,
the sort of
mm,
leadership team.
mm.
Just to go back to that thing about big churches and small churches, by the
Yeah,
way,
go for it. Go for it.
churches have different flavors, different mandates, or different assignments, I guess, in a community.
Yeah.
And what I found was our big church actually,
Mm,
prayer is not our biggest strength, I have
yeah.
to say. But we do pray, and in terms of our numbers, that's probably quite a lot compared to some churches. But some of
Yeah.
those smaller churches, everybody prayed. There was one church,
Mm,
a little Church of England church out in Eston, in the edge of Middlesbrough,
mhm,
that had a prayer meeting already going on that had 7 women, and the
mm.
church is only about 20 people. Had 7 women, so proportionately very
Yeah.
praying church.
Yeah.
And they started to pray, for Festival Teesside. And that prayer meeting and the church started to
Mm,
grow. And the prayer
mm,
meeting grew to about 30
mm,
people in their
mm,
church
mm.
over the course
Wow.
of of
Wow.
praying up to Festival Teesside.
Mm,
So
mm,
some churches actually have more of a kind of, I don't know, maybe a
yeah.
mandate for prayer. Anyway,
Yeah.
so what was your question?
I'm just trying to remember now. So, yeah. I was talking, yeah, how is prayer integrated into bringing this? How is prayer and the
Prophetic word.
prophetic integrated to prophesy over the community? And obviously, there's prophets in the likes of Ezekiel is prophesying over the land and things like that. So actually, we're praying for this thing to happen, but how are we praying, prophesying? How were potentially prophetic words integrated into that? Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, the prayer team itself, the leadership team, we're all familiar with prophecy and open to prophecy.
Yeah.
So within the team itself, there were people were coming with, and I was asking them, what do you feel God is saying
Mm,
about this
mm,
festival?
mm,
Good question
mm,
for
mm,
anybody. And
mm.
actually,
Yeah.
you'll be amazed at what people give you when you say, "What do you feel God is saying about Teesside?
Mm,
What do you feel God
mm,
is saying about
mm,
Manchester?"
mm,
Um, so I was asking those kind of questions. We were making note
mm,
of what God was saying, and then we were praying into that ourselves, but we were also feeding some of that through
mm,
to
mm,
the various
mm.
kind of outlets where we draw the wider church into
Yeah.
prayer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we had a prayer kind of newsletter that the Luis Palau Association put together for us. We would send
Yes.
in,
Yes.
this is the scripture this month that we're focusing on. These are some
Mm,
of the prayer points, but that came from what is God wanting to do this month? What is
mm.
God wanted to say this month? Um, and that went out to a mailing list of about 300 people who'd asked for a prayer newsletter on the back of
Yeah.
Festival Teesside. So we had people
Yeah.
praying like that. We had a prayer walking app called Oikos,
Right. Yeah. Okay.
which was, where ordinary people could pray for their street and mark where they had prayed, and that made a map. So you could go
Yeah.
on the Oikos
So
map.
everybody could see where prayer was happening and where it wasn't, the blank spaces.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. People from the community, from, the whole of Teesside, would
Mm,
send words in.
mm,
Sometimes they'd send them to
mm,
me or send them to
mm,
Steve, or
mm,
and we would
mm,
between us pass these around
mm,
and pray into them.
mm,
We prayer walked as a team and as a wider team. We had prayer meetings as well. We drew people
mm.
together. Um, over in different towns around the area, had
Yes.
prayer meetings in specific, so made it more specific to your bit of the community.
Because it was a wide area, so you had
Yeah.
sub-regions as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. Okay. Good. Great.
Yeah. And those prayer meetings again were very open
Mm,
to prophetic words. So, in
mm.
that smaller context where it's about prayer and intercession for the
Yeah.
area, we
Yeah.
pretty much had a more of an open mic
Yes.
kind
Yeah.
of atmosphere.
Yeah.
And some of the words that we then kind of took on board, and certain words I would then pass up the line to the
Mm.
the leadership team of Festival Teesside.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
The more
Yeah.
significant
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, and some,
Yeah. Good.
prophetic words are different, aren't they? Some just fuel that moment.
That's
Um,
right. Yes. Yeah.
and some are actually, oh, hang on a minute, this is a weighty word
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
actually is for a region, and it might
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
it might
Yeah.
be a different kind of strategy than just
Yeah. Yeah. So some affirming, confirming, adding to the fire, the fuel, the
yeah,
encouragement, the 1
yeah,
Corinthians 14:3. Some have a little bit more discernment about them or future or have some direction that actually somebody in leadership is going to have to weigh and
yeah,
strategic differences made and things. So obviously, and the key thing I'm hearing here is relationship.
yes,
Relationship and time. This was built obviously over time. And I think there might be people listening who think, oh gosh, that sounds like hard work. I think it is. It
yeah,
sounds like.
yeah,
Yes, yeah, yeah. And sometimes the prophetic wants a now response, but actually it is about putting in some work and effort. My belief is that prayer is going to be the key to revival and the praying people. Um, I'm going to shift us slightly into something. So we're talking about their prophesying and praying over the communities. What can we do in terms of then prophesying over the land? So if the fall has broken our relationship with God, relationship with myself, relationship with others, but relationship with the land, that authority, can we just prophesy over the land and hear God for the land? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. Yes. I think if you go right back to Genesis,
Yeah.
to Adam and Eve,
Mm.
the call, the mandate to Adam and Eve was
Mm.
to rule over the earth and subdue it. And I
Yeah.
think as Christians, there is that sense of um, having a a call to bring order to chaos,
Yes.
over
Yes.
places, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
I think if you look at Jesus in Luke, is it Luke 19, where he prays over Jerusalem, he weeps
Yes.
over
Yep.
Jerusalem, I mean,
Yep.
it's people and it's land, but he prophesies about what's going to happen to
Yes.
place
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
I think again, it comes back to this authority that we have over everything.
Mm.
God gave
Mm.
Adam and Eve authority over everything, you
Mm.
know, not
Mm.
just the people, not just, and there were no
Yes.
people then,
Yeah.
were there? It was the animals,
Yeah.
it was the land, it was the
Yes.
fruit of, make the land
Yeah.
fruitful, be fruitful,
Yeah.
multiply, but that included the land as well, didn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
then through the fall, that was spoiled. The land became unproductive. So
Yeah.
part of our coming, bringing that order, that sense of
Mm.
godly kingdom come,
Mm.
your
Yes.
kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven,
Yes.
is
Yeah.
bringing order in
Yes.
chaos. So
Yes.
just to give you an example, so from Festival Teesside, I'll give you an example.
Yeah. Yep. Good.
The
Good.
the festival was held in a place called Stuart Park in Middlesbrough.
Okay.
Now, Stuart Park, and I only found this out because I started to care, I started to love the land, started to
Wow.
pray with other intercessors and prophets, started
Mm.
to prayer walk round that park. We prayer walked that
Mm.
park so many times, and I
Wow.
started to look into the history a bit as well.
Wow.
There's certain
Okay.
triggers that God put in my mind that I
Mm.
need to look this up. Where you
Hmm.
have a little
Yeah.
thought, like something's happened here that's ungodly.
Mm.
I'm going to look it up,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it wasn't all just about God dropping something into my mind. This is a process, and a lot of
Yes.
it comes
Yeah.
from relationships with other people as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so I was praying around the site at Stuart
Mm.
Park one
Mm.
day,
Mm.
and felt like there's been Freemasonry here. That was it. It was like
Wow.
just a thought Freemasonry. So I
Wow.
I didn't know anything about the area really, but there was then
Mm.
another person that I was chatting to,
Mm.
who was a prayer
Mm.
warrior from another church,
Mm.
intercessor,
Mm.
and she said to me, "Oh, this part here, this is where Henry Balco's house was." That
Okay.
burned down in the 60s. There's actually nothing there, but there's
Okay.
like a couple of pillars, that were the
Okay.
steps down to his. This was his estate, Stuart Park,
Okay.
Henry Balco. So she said, "Oh, he lived here." I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." So when I got home, I started to look into Henry Balco, look
Okay.
into the history of Stuart Park, and found out that Henry Balco, and I think he's called John Vaughan, were the big steel industrialists who
Okay.
founded. They're called the fathers of modern Middlesbrough. Okay,
Wow.
that in itself is a loaded
Wow.
spiritual term.
Mm.
Okay. The fathers
Mm.
of modern Middlesbrough, because they were the steel and
Mm.
coal barons
Sure.
who found iron ore in the hills and then
Yeah.
mined it and produced the steel. And Middlesbrough's quite a young place, really.
Mm.
So they, they're they were also, as I was looking into, they were prominent Freemasons. Henry Balco was an extremely prominent Freemason, quite high up in the
Okay.
Free.
Yes. Yeah.
The church just on the outside of the park where we were kind of, which is the oldest church in Middlesbrough, where we were kind of convening as a team.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
was actually where Balco and Vaughan are buried, and
Oh,
their
really?
graves were paid for by the Freemasons and
Oh, right, right. Okay.
the upkeep of
Yep.
that of those graves were paid
Yeah.
for by the Freemasons. I got
Okay.
talking to the vicar of that church.
Yes. Yeah.
On the back of all of this, I said, "Oh, I've just found this out about these graves and everything." She said, "Oh, I've got a terrible problem with Freemasonry in our church." Um,
Wow.
and people just blocking what she was trying to do. And she was a young vicar. And
Wow.
so I got to know her, prayed for her, and
Yeah.
we started to pray. And I just felt this sense of that Festival Teesside was actually coming to break the spirit of Freemasonry that had
Wow.
held the people of
Wow.
Middlesbrough captive.
Wow.
And that
Wow.
God was replacing the fathers of Middlesbrough with his own fatherhood, that the father
Mm,
the heavenly our heavenly Father
mm,
was coming
mm,
to
mm.
father the people of Middlesbrough, and all that deprivation, that poverty,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
had actually come from that
Yeah.
place.
Oppression, suppression,
Yeah,
all
from
those
this
things.
wrong
Yeah.
fathering spirit,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so that was quite a big one. So I
Mm.
fed that into the leadership team, the main
Yeah. Yeah.
team of Festival
Yeah.
Teesside. And we all prayed about that, and our prayer team prayed about that. I didn't pass that on to the wider church because these are things that not everyone would understand. So that
Yes.
that was something that I felt was for a leadership level.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
and we also went and prayed around that churchyard. And I have yet to
Yeah.
go, I haven't done it yet, to go and pray over those graves as well. I just felt that a
Yep.
prophetic action that we needed to do was to throw
Yep.
salt on the graves,
Yep.
and pray around the graves. So,
Yeah. Fantastic.
so
Okay.
so that's an example of praying for the land,
Okay.
that there was something in that land. And then at Festival
Absolutely.
Teesside, like the best moment ever, we had Martin Smith on the last night leading worship,
Yeah.
and Martin Smith raised this flag over
Wow.
Middlesbrough, which over Stuart Park, which and
Mm.
waved this flag which just
Yep.
said "Our God reigns." Um,
Wow.
and
Wow.
waving this flag, it was
Wow.
like I just felt this spirit break,
Wow.
um, and something break in over our town.
Wow.
And we had something like, I think we had about 27,000 people per day through the gates at Festival Teesside.
And that was an entire week.
There was
7 days?
there was two, that was over the 2 days of the
Two
weekend.
2 days. 2 days a
Over the
weekend, sorry.
over the entire week, there were missions into all kinds of like different
Yeah.
places,
Yeah.
prisons, schools, all kinds of things.
Wow. Amazing.
Um, and
Amazing.
about 1,800
Amazing.
people
Yeah. 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 And it's
responses.
the beauty of God's word, that grasping something that is a heavenly
Yeah,
vision, possession, and part of that is bringing that prophetic word. There's the warfare, we mentioned that there, and then there's landing it on the ground and the relationship there. So prophetic often working a lot in the upward, but that need to be in relationship, in love with
yeah,
those around, other
yeah,
church leaders, our own church leadership, other intercessors, connecting so that things can start to happen laterally, and we can bring God's word down to the earth to bring impact. And we've got about 1 or 2 minutes left. So, for people on here who are sort of thinking, right, how do I get into that? What do you want to just encourage folks into to impact our areas for God? Give us 1 or 2 minutes of
mm, yeah.
just landing it. Come on.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, start to pray for your area. So, start to ask God for his sight, his vision for your neighborhood. And that probably, we are sensory beings, aren't we? God has given us
Mm,
five senses. So
mm,
to go outside and be in the fresh air and to look around and to hear the sounds and to walk and and use your senses to understand, where is it that I live? Lord, speak to
mm,
me through
mm,
all my senses. Show me what your heart is for this area. Ask God to introduce you to people as well.
mm,
To
mm.
begin, these practical things, often we, as prophets, we often forget the real practical things, like, God, introduce me to the right people. Let me
Yes.
meet the people that
Yeah.
you want me to connect with,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
start to build relationships, and be interested in what's going on. If your village is having a village fete, go. Go and not to share the gospel, just go and buy some cakes and interact with the community. If they're having
Yeah.
something, some kind of litter pick or something,
Mm.
go make relate
Yeah.
because that is how you make relationships with
Mm.
people. Um,
Amazing.
and just start to
Brilliant.
and have a long-term vision. I think that is so important for
Yeah.
prophets. I remember years
Mm.
ago, I remember watching a gardening program, and you may have heard or may not have heard of the famous gardener Capability Brown, who was a
Yeah.
landscape designer,
Mm.
so it's quite pertinent for this conversation. But he used to design landscapes back in the sort of early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s,
Yeah.
and on stately homes, and he was shifting whole valleys and creating lakes. I think Blenheim
Wow.
Palace might be, he was
Yeah.
he was shifting the
Yeah.
land totally. um but I remember this gardener saying, walking down this avenue of oak trees, massive oak trees, he said, Capability Brown probably would never have seen these trees mature in his lifetime.
Wow.
He was
Yeah.
planting them as seedlings, but he had that long-term vision. Okay.
Amazing.
So I think that is so important that we are actually
Yeah.
have that vision, that some of what we're doing is just planting seeds that other people may reap the benefit,
Wow.
our
Wow,
children
that's
benefit.
amazing. That is amazing. The long-term vision. Without vision, the people perish, and we need that vision. And sometimes it's short-term, but sometimes it's long-term. We're not sowing for ourselves. We're sowing legacy across
Yes.
generations for His plans, not ours. So,
Yes.
hey, Claire, thank you so much indeed. Thank you
Thank
for bringing of yourself, your heart, your stories. Thank you for answering challenging questions, which we
you. You
went
ask
off
hard
here and
questions, Kevin.
we went off here and there. And I bless you. We bless you as the fireplace, and we will catch up with you again.
Thank
Bless you.
you.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Thanks a lot.
bye.